Hello, friends. We are going to be talking about informative writing, looking at the prompt, and finding information in our essay that we could possibly use for our plan in our essay. So right here, I'm going to write what our prompt was. And I added to it a little bit to make it a little bit more clear than the last video. So the last video, we talked about purpose, task, and audience. And our prompt says, inform your reader about manifest destiny. Now, what I want to add to that is also westward expansion. So your prompt is going to be inform your reader about manifest destiny and westward expansion of the U.S. Okay, so we talked about our task, our purpose, and our audience. So the first prompt said, what is manifest destiny? I want to add westward expansion because that's what manifest destiny is about, is westward expansion. So with informative essays, when you're writing an informative essay and you're given 3 different sources, I want you to think about this while you're reading. You can write a paragraph for each of the articles. Let me see here. Of the articles. A paragraph for each of the articles. You can't really do that with opinion because sometimes there's 2 on one side of the opinion and there's another article on the other side. So you can't really do that. But with informative, see if that would work, and that is the best way to plan. It'll be so much easier for you. So today we're not going to be planning. We're going to be doing that in our next lesson. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through and I'm going to mark things that I might possibly want to write about. Now, so you need a highlighter. Okay. Making sure my highlighter works. Not really. Making sure our highlighter, that one works good. All right. So we're going to use our highlighter and highlight anything that I might want to write about. That way I can go back, and when it's time for me to plan using my matrix or my ITC outline or my graphic organizer, depending on which one I choose, then I don't have to read everything. I can go back and see what I highlighted and what I thought was important. Okay. So my first one is, what is manifest destiny? So I think a paragraph on that would be really good because that's a big part of my prompt. So let's read this, and I'm going to highlight things I think is important. Okay. What is manifest destiny, and what does it have to do with westward expansion of America? Manifest destiny is not an event, but an idea born in 1845. Oh, I'm going to highlight that. I think that's really important. The phrase was written by John O'Sullivan. He was writing newspaper editorials about ongoing border disputes. I think that's important too. We're going to use this as much as I can. That's not a very good color. It's too dark. He was writing newspaper editorials about an ongoing border disputes that America was having with Mexico and Great Britain. They owned the land that surrounded America at that time. The word manifest, that's important. Let me see if I can I'm just going to underline it this time. The word manifest means something obvious, and destiny describes events that are certain to happen in the future. When O'Sullivan wrote the phrase manifest destiny, he argued that God had given America the right to expand throughout the North American continent. In his mind and the minds of many others, it was apparent that America was meant to control all of North America. So that was the idea of manifest destiny. So I think that's important. What it was, when it was, who created it, and what it means. I think that's really important for my essay, so I'm going to mark that. Disagreements immediately began around the idea. Many in North America, in the North, where slavery was outlawed, nicked the phrase as a ridiculous notion. They feared that manifest destiny really just meant expanding slavery. Others, however, embraced the idea and wanted the country's borders to include all of Mexico and the entire North American continent. Those in favor of manifest destiny believed it was inevitable that the country would reach from Atlantic to the Pacific as well. I think that's important too. It talks about what those people who believed in it believed in as well. This was following the Revolutionary War when our country was not even 100 years old, causing nationalism or being very proud of your country. There's a context clue. What is nationalism? It's being proud of my country. And it's at an all-time high. So a lot of people are very proud of their country. So they think that they should expand the country because they think their country is so great. So that makes sense. Okay. But there's some people who say they're fighting over, if I remember what happened in the past, and we haven't gotten to the Civil War yet, but some states, mostly in the North, did not want slavery. And as states were admitted into the Union or the United States, they had to decide if they were going to have slavery or not. So I think a lot of people were worried that this was just another way to get more states that allowed slavery. And they thought that that was ridiculous. Okay, so let's go here. They saw the movement to the West to be a way to share the democratic principles of America all over the world. Because of that pride in their country, those people thought that they needed to share it with the rest of the continent and that it was even their destiny to do so. So they wanted to share the democracy and how America worked with everybody around the world. Because it was working well for them, they wanted to share it with everybody else. The idea of manifest destiny resulted in the movement westward and historical events that became known as the westward expansion. So the events that happened after manifest destiny were western expansion. Even though this was not the only reason for moving west, this was the idea that started everyone thinking about the possibilities of moving west. All right, so those are some good things that I can come up with for my plans. So manifest destiny. Before I move on, I want to see if I understand what's going on. So if I understand what's going on in the article, I'm able to paraphrase it. I'm able to quote it, and I'm able to write it in my essay more easily because I understand what's going on. So manifest destiny was something that came up with this guy in 1845 by John O'Sullivan. He thought that it was obvious that America should stretch from coast to coast, and it should cover all of North America. Some people didn't like it. Some people believe that because were such a great country that they needed to share all their parts of their country with everybody else on the continent, and it caused a westward expansion. So I think I understand that that passage pretty well. So I'm going to put that to the side. Okay. All right. So the next one is the United States expands west. So this is all about why people moved west other than manifest destiny. Okay, remember that was an idea that started it all, but not the only reason. So I think I'm going to read here in this article about that. In the 19th century, many Americans believed in manifest destiny. They thought God wanted the country to expand across the entire continent, spreading freedom and democracy. Therefore, it was America's destiny to settle the continent. Okay, so that's just kind of repeating what we just read. Opening the West. So before this, if I remember when we studied the 13 colonies, America didn't own the West. So maybe this will tell us what happened in order for them to be able to move west. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. That is important. How did they get the land? After Lewis and Clark returned with a core discovery, Americans saw the West as a land of opportunity. Fur traders and trappers moved west as early as the 1810s, often joining Native American tribes. Now, this was before 1845 with Manifest Destiny, so these people were moving before that. These mountain men played an important role in the opening of the West to immigrants. African-American Jim Beckworth discovered a path through the Sierra Nevada mountains and created a trail to California. Jim Bridger established Fort Bridger, which became an important supply stop for wagons heading west on the Immigrant Trail. I think that's important. They were the first people to go over west, and they joined the Native Americans. Okay. Religious migrants. There were several reasons that people moved west that dealt with religion. One would be for religious freedom, and the other to spread Christianity to Native Americans in the West. Now, if you remember, Native Americans all lived in the West. They all lived in the United States before we all moved on. moved here, before colonists moved here. In 1836, missionaries Marcus and Narcissa Whitman led a small group from New York to Oregon Territory, where they preached to the Cayuse Indians. Narcissa wrote letters home about her life in the West. These letters were published and convinced many people to migrate west. After her mission closed, the Whitmans returned east and then led 1,000 pioneers west to the Oregon Trail in 1843. The Whitmans were not the only groups of missionaries who traveled west to share Christianity to Native Americans. Okay, so they were sharing Christianity. That's important for us to know why people move west. The overall deal manifest destiny is that God blessed this growth. Missionaries also believe that God wanted them to spread Christianity to those not of the faith in the new territory. So that's another way that manifest destiny affected people moving over. Okay. At this time, there was not a variety of religions in America. There was only one faith in Britain, and a few groups left Britain in order to practice their own faith. These religions were all based in Christianity. The Native Americans had their own religion based on history and the earth. That is important too. Their religion was as old as their tribe and would be handed down and practiced with each generation. The missionaries were very determined to convert the Native Americans to Christianity as they believed they needed to save their souls. They didn't understand much about it. At that time, like it says here, there were only a few religions based in Christianity. Now, if you remember when we talked about why people moved over to the colonies, because they weren't all allowed to have freedom of religion. They had to have this one religion, and that was it. The Church of England, and that was it. So they wanted to come over to have their freedom of religion. Other people migrated for religious freedoms, kind of like the reason why people came over from Britain. People persecuted the Mormons for their religious beliefs, which forced them to flee their homes in New York and move to the Midwest. They were forced to move further west when the persecution continued in their new home. So there's a group that were trying to find a place that they would be able to practice their religious beliefs without being persecuted, so they could have their freedom of religion. So those are some reasons why some people moved over. I think that's kind of important to know. As the U.S. expands its borders, as more Americans settled in the West, the United States quickly expanded its borders. In 1836, the Republic of Texas declared independence from Mexico and petitioned to join the United States. However, because Congress disagreed about expanding slavery in the West, Texas wasn't admitted as a state until 1845. Shortly after Texas joined the United States, the Mexican-American War began. In 1848, the two countries signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that set the border at the Rio Grande, and the United States received Mexico's land from Texas to California. So now the country went all the way over to California in 1848. In the Northwest, both Great Britain and the United States claimed land known as Oregon Country. In 1818, the two countries had agreed to occupy the territory jointly. As more people settled in the West, neither country wanted to continue sharing the land. They signed the Oregon Treaty in 1848, so the same time that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. Dividing the territory at the 49th parallel, the United States gained the land that is Oregon, Washington, and Montana, as well as parts of Idaho and Wyoming. So in 1848, the country gained a lot of land. Pioneers head west. In 1854, the United States signed the Gadsden Purchase, giving Mexico $10 million for 30,000 square miles of land, which is southern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico today. The treaty expanded the continental United States to its present-day borders. So by 1854, our country had the current borders that it has now. As the country grew, Americans and immigrants moved west. In 1848, James Marshall found gold. Ooh, here's another reason why people might move over. Sutter's Mill in California. As people discovered more gold, word spread quickly and people moved into the area to find their fortunes. So that might be a reason why people move over. By the next year, the news had reached the east and spread to other countries. 90,000 people settled in California in 1849. In 1862, the government passed the Homestead Act to encourage people to move to the Western Territories. Settlers can get 160 acres, that's a lot of land, for free, other than a small registration fee. They had to file a land claim, live on the land for 5 years, make improvements to it, and build a shelter at least 12 by 14 feet in size. So they had to build a house on it. After 5 years, the settlers filed for a deed of title. The program was very successful. By 1900, more than 80 million acres had been granted to 480,000 homesteaders. So there's many reasons why people moved over there. We have religion. We have the gold rush. We have the Homestead Act. Manifest destiny. So there's so many different reasons why people went over. Okay. Fur traders. So I'm just taking some notes that I can have for later. All right, my last one. Traveling on the immigrant trails. Okay, so we have why people traveled, what is manifest destiny, and the actual traveling that we can write about. So that's 3 paragraphs right there. In 1800, the United States controlled most of the land from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, which is halfway, if we look at our maps, it's about halfway to, cuts a country almost in half. Almost. Its population had increased to 76 million, and nearly 1/3 of Americans lived west of the Mississippi, okay, by the end of the century. Until the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, the majority of settlers headed west using the overland trails. From 1841 to 1866, up to 650,000 people traveled west on the Oregon to California and the Santa Fe trails. So there's 3 trails. Why did people emigrate west? In the late 1830s, the United States experienced a financial depression, which caused businesses to fail and many people to lose their job. During that time, the Mississippi Valley suffered floods and a cholera epidemic. Well, we know what an epidemic is now, don't we? It's a pandemic, but an epidemic is just below a pandemic. It's kind of controlled. We're a little bit above an epidemic right now. But cholera is a disease caused by poor sanitation, spread by when people eat or drink contaminated food or water. So if they have not very good sanitary conditions, and then that gets into their food and water and they drink it, they can end up with cholera. These negative push factors cause people to leave home and search for a better life. So I'm going to add on to my list over here. There was a depression. Okay. And then the cholera epidemic. Cholera. So push factors are things that push people to do things. Pull factors. So we have the cholera and we have floods. Ooh, floods. I need to add floods in there too. That'll make people leave. Pull factors are things that bring people to the West for positive reasons. Fur traders, missionaries, and government officials wrote letters and advertisements that convinced people to move west. So some people just wanted to move just because all these people said it was so good. Also, the availability of cheap land brought many immigrants to the West because land in the East and Europe was unaffordable. As farming technology improved, Western lands became even more appealing to migrants. After people found gold in California in 1848, people emigrated there from all over the world in hopes of finding their fortune. So farmland, I'm going to add that to my list. We already know all this. Okay. How much did the trip cost? A pioneer could buy everything needed for the journey for about $150 to $200, which would be about $6,000 in 2019. However, 60 to 80% of the migrants were farmers who already owned many of the needed supplies, including wagons and livestock. Farm families often spent a year saving and preparing extra supplies for the journey, making the trip even more affordable. Some men hired on help to drive wagons and to move herds west, making the trip nearly free or even profitable for some people. Oops, I didn't mean to cross that out. I was trying to underline it. What was the journey like? The pioneers usually began their trip from port cities on the Missouri River, such as the St. Louis or in Independence, Missouri. The trails merged as they crossed Nebraska to Fort Kearny and then separated again in Wyoming or Idaho. The journey west covered 2,000 miles and took 4 to 6 months to complete. 4 to 6 months journey, with pioneers traveling 12 to 15 miles each day. Emigrants left from April to September to reach the Sierra Nevadas before the winter storms began. You don't want to be caught in mountains before that begins. All right. Most pioneers used a prairie schooner to travel west. A team of oxen or mules pulled these wagons, which could hold 2,000 pounds of supplies. The 4-foot by 10-foot bed could be tarred and floated across rivers. However, the wagons had poor suspension and the tough trails made riding, my goodness, there's a typo there, and tough trails made them riding in them uncomfortable. Most people walked or rode horses alongside the wagons instead of enduring the bumpy wagon ride. So they walked 12 to 15 miles each day. Think about that. As the numbers of people traveling west increased, the trails became crowded with wagons, army units, traders, and later on even tourists. Pioneers had to spread out across the plains to hunt, graze animals, and avoid the dust kicked up by wagons. The days were long and hard. Pioneers woke up before dawn for breakfast and to repack the wagon. By 7 a.m., the wagon started and didn't stop until noon for lunch. They continued in the afternoon, circling the wagons around 5 p.m. Men secured the animals and made repairs while the women cooked. They also taught the children, told stories, sang, and danced. Sundays were often reserved for religions, services, and rest. Although many pioneers feared attacks by Native Americans, they quickly realized they were more likely to die from disease, be crushed under the wagon wheels, or drown. Emigrants dealt with a lack of clean water and fuel for fires, as well as weather-related disasters such as lightning and hail. 1 in 10 people died on the trails. So I have a lot of things that I can talk about. As I'm reading this, I think I'm going to plan one passage per paragraph. So that'll be our next video.